You're watching the SegPay News Network. Today we're talking censorship and free speech with Alison Boden, Executive Director of the Free Speech Coalition. Hello again, it's Mark Pettit in the SegPay studio here in the United States, where freedom of speech is a fundamental right. But is that right in jeopardy? Here to discuss this topic and much more is Alison Boden. She is Executive Director of the Free Speech Coalition. Alison, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Let's talk about the mission of the Free Speech Coalition. What are you guys all about, Alison?
So the Free Speech Coalition is the trade association for the adult entertainment and pleasure products industries. We've been around since 1991, and our mission is to protect the rights and freedoms of the adult industry. So we represent companies and individuals, all the way from studios and platforms to content creators, pleasure product manufacturers, you name it. And we fight against government overreach and corporate discrimination.
And speaking of that, seems to be a lot of it going on these days. What are the top three things that the Free Speech Coalition is focused on right now?
Right now, our three biggest priorities are age verification, banking fairness, and changing the narrative about our industry. On age verification, we're tracking and weighing in on legislation in dozens of states and the federal level. On banking, our members are facing routine account closures, payment processing denials, simply because of the industry that they're in. And so we're fighting that on multiple fronts. And then finally, something we're really excited about is we've partnered with EPA United to highlight the real experiences, real jobs, and real people that you see behind the screen. So this project involves videos of performers talking about the reality of working in the industry, the ways that it's positive, the ways it's been meaningful to them, kind of as a way to counteract the misinformation that drives so much of the hostility our industry is facing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive a little deeper into each one of these topics. Let's start with age verification because that's white hot around the world. And I understand Free Speech Coalition has launched your own solution. You want to talk to us about it?
Yeah, one of the many issues with age verification laws and the way they've been implemented is that every website has to pay a third party to verify every single visitor, sometimes more than once. So ultimately, these age verification companies that lobbied for these laws are profiting because our members don't have other options. So we evaluated a number of organizations we could partner with and ended up deciding to partner with an industry technology partner who has been doing this and has been serving our industry for years. We launched Private Abe in March, and the idea is that it's privacy preserving by design. No data about a user is stored, and that gives users a level of trust that they don't have with other providers. Not to mention that it's really affordable at $30 a month starting for FSC members.
Excellent. Let's dive deeper into censorship because it's really confusing these days. Who is going to ultimately decide what we can see on the internet and what we can say, about our opinions?
Censorship really is on the rise, and I think what makes it so complicated is that it's coming from multiple directions at once. You've got government censorship through legislation, where states and Congress pass laws targeting legal content under the guise of protecting kids or preventing human trafficking. But then you also have private censorship through payment processors, banks, and platforms that are just deplatforming legal businesses without any explanation or recourse. So who decides? I mean, right now, it's a really uncomfortable mix of legislators responding to moral panics, essentially, corporations managing reputational risks, and then advocacy groups that are pushing to restrict content that they find objectionable.
Here in the United States, freedom of speech is basically what this country was built on, so that we can say what we think and not fear that. But it seems like we're stepping back in time. Do you feel like free speech itself is under attack?
I've worked in the adult entertainment industry for over 20 years, and I can say without any hesitation that what we're seeing now is the worst it's been in my career. When I started, the main threats were pretty traditional. You'd had obscenity prosecutions, discriminatory zoning laws, that sort of thing. But Now the pressure is a lot more sophisticated and pervasive, I would say. At this point, we're tracking legislation in over 30 states with multiple federal proposals that could fundamentally reshape how adult content is treated online. And then we have what would maybe call financial censorship, legal businesses being cut off from banking without any kind of due process or appeal. And so the cumulative effect here is that it's harder and more expensive to operate a legal adult business today than it was 10 years ago. And that's a real problem for free expression, and it should really concern people beyond this industry.
It seems like merchants in this high risk adult space are under intense scrutiny, much more than you would see in other industries. I'm curious, what's the difference between content moderation and censorship, in your opinion?
That is such a great question. And in my opinion, content moderation, when it's done right, is removing content that is genuinely harmful, whether it's illegal material like child sexual abuse imagery or content that's legal but makes platforms less attractive to users, like hate speech. Platforms have a totally legitimate interest in setting these standards, and most people support that. I would say that censorship is something different. It's when platforms or governments remove or restrict legal content because they find it objectionable or uncomfortable or politically inconvenient. And I think that's a really important distinction. When you look at, for example, the UK's Online Safety Act, you see how the lines can blur between governments and what companies are doing. A lot of times, platforms will just restrict legal adult content because it's cheaper than investing in that real compliance infrastructure. And that's not moderation, that's censorship operating through regulatory pressure. And the effect on legal creators and businesses is the same either way. Their livelihoods are disappearing.
So, Allison, what can merchants do to protect themselves and the content that they're selling?
There are a few things. I think the first one is to know the law and not just where it is that your corporate headquarters is. You need to understand what the laws are that affect your business in every jurisdiction that you are doing business. Second thing, make sure you have your documentation, your 2257 records, your compliance practices are well documented. You have memos explaining every content review process you have and how your age verification systems work. Because if you're ever challenged on these things, you have to be able to defend yourself, and those documents are just invaluable. I would say the third thing is you shouldn't be trying to do this on your own. You should maybe join FSC so you have access to the legal resources and policy updates and even sort of our collective voice for the industry when you need it. And then maybe fourth, I would say diversify your financial relationships wherever you can. The merchants are the most vulnerable when they only have a single payment processor and a single bank account. That's fragile. And the more redundancy you can build into your business infrastructure, the more resilient you are when someone tries to cut you off.
This seems like a huge game of whack a mole. As you said, regulations vary by state, they vary by country. How in the world do you keep up with all this?
It really does feel like that some days. And like I mentioned, we're tracking legislation in over 30 states, dozens of federal bills, proposed regulations. And thankfully, we have a small but very dedicated team at FSC, some good legislative tracking tools. And we work with a few lobbyists who kind of keep their ears to the ground on the issues that we care about. But honestly, tracking the bills is kind of the easy part. Stopping that whack a mole dynamic is what is really hard. That's why we're actually working to introduce our own legislation that would better protect kids and adult businesses, starting at the state level. So I hope to have more to report on that soon.
We'll have to check back in on that. You have a number of executives who are on your board. Kathy Beardsley is the CEO of SegPay. She's been a board member of this Free Speech Coalition for quite some time now. Why is it important for these executives to get involved with you?
Kathy is such a great example of the kind of leadership that actually moves the needle for this industry. When a CEO sits on our board, they're not just writing a check. They're bringing all of the expertise, the industry relationships, and their own credibility to strengthen what we do. And from the company's perspective, board involvement actually means they have a direct voice in shaping the policies and priorities that are going to affect their business. FSC is probably most effective when we have like a wide cross section of the industry at the table: platforms, payment processors, creators, technology companies, retailers. Every single sector is seeing different pressures and has, different expertise to contribute. In SegPay's case, Kathy's experience and knowledge has been invaluable through our work, I would say, on banking policy and lobbying Congress about financial discrimination in particular. That kind of domain knowledge is something we just can't replicate any other way.
That was very interesting that you all went to Washington to meet with staffers of members of Congress. And from what Kathy tells us, they were actually open and receptive to listening.
You know, it was pretty surprising to me too at first. I expected to go into Congress and have them treat us the way that they seem to treat us in public, which is that, what we do is illegitimate and they don't care what we think. But the reality has honestly been that this issue of banking discrimination is affecting real people, their constituents. And if nothing else, politicians want to get reelected. When they find out that they have hundreds, maybe thousands of constituents that are facing what they've all said just seems unfair on its face, they actually are listening.
Banking discrimination. Donald Trump has claimed that he's been a victim of banking discrimination. For these online and adult businesses, one day they have a bank account or a payment processor, and the next day they're shut down. That's what it is all about, correct?
Absolutely. And, that's actually, I think, been one of the most important features of this particular issue. This is happening to people all across the board. It's not just adult, it's, oil and gas, firearms, other industries that are disfavored, essentially. And all we're trying to say is look, if what we're doing is lawful, we need a bank account to do it. Otherwise, things get very dangerous very quickly when you take people from being able to transact in the real world to no longer being able to pay their rent, pay payroll, transact in a way that is safe and legal. Now you've got to trust your money to someone else. And that's actually where human trafficking can happen.
Right. And we've also seen it in the CBD industry. These companies can't get bank accounts and they're walking around with huge amounts of cash, making themselves targets and so forth. But I think that's interesting. If it's legitimate business, why can't you get a bank account? That's something that seems fairly simple.
It's so straightforward. And the fact that it's happening constantly and it's so devastating, it makes no sense. So when we've gone to Congress, we've said, obviously this needs a legislative fix, but let's be honest, Congress is not moving particularly quickly on this or many other things. And so a lot of our members are just facing this crisis right now and need an answer, which is why we're pursuing maybe a more near-term solution. We're in the process right now of applying for a federal credit union charter, and it would be specifically to serve this industry, FSC members. Because honestly, we need both the long-term policy fight, but also a real solution for members before it's too late for them.
And would this be industry owned, Allison, or would this be FSC owned?
Credit unions are very unique. They are not like banks that have corporate owners or stocks. They are owned by their members. So it would absolutely be industry owned.
Wow. So that would be a significant development in the industry if that happened. Let's talk about your membership. Currently, most of your members are US based companies, right? Why should companies in the UK and beyond join FSC?
You know, a few reasons. I would say first is that the US is still a very large market for adult content, and what happens in US law and policy has downstream effects on every company that does business here, whether it is you are serving individual users or even licensing content that has to be sold in the United States, no matter where you're headquartered. So if you're a UK or an EU platform with US users, for example, our age verification laws apply to you. Second, the regulatory trends we're seeing in the US, financial discrimination, age verification, platform liability expansions, things like that, they are the same trends that are playing out in the UK and the EU, sometimes at different stages, but there's a real value in being able to share that intelligence and strategy across jurisdictions. And then, FSC has relationships and credibility in Washington, like we said, that it's taken many years to build. And so EU and UK companies that want to engage get access to that network without having to build it from scratch. Honestly, the adult industry globally is just stronger when we're coordinated rather than fragmented.
What is the future of online content, and especially for creators who have made a living off this? Are they going to be able to survive and thrive in this environment?
This is certainly the most active time I have seen in my career in terms of attacking our industry, but I'm genuinely optimistic. Part of that's historical perspective, right? The adult industry has been under attack for as long as it's existed, and there have always been legislators, advocacy groups, corporations trying to shut us down. And we're still here. So it's clear that people want what we offer. And that's not going to change. The creator economy in adult is more diverse and resilient than it's ever been. And direct creator to fan platforms have really shifted the economic power toward individual creators, which I think has been healthy. The challenges are real, the legal pressure, the financial discrimination, the algorithmic suppression. But frankly, this industry has always adapted. And that's what FSC is fighting for, is a policy environment that treats us like any other legal industry. Sensible age verification with privacy protections, fair banking access. They're legal standards. And if we get there, creators don't just survive, they'll thrive.
Excellent. And that's why we started this channel, is to take information like you're providing directly to merchants so they can hear it from the people who are on the front lines. So Alison Boden, Executive Director of the Free Speech Coalition, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure, Mark.
And stay with us. We will have much more content just like this right here on the SegPay News Network.